So Danny, you did the plus category of Trail Bike of the Year. What were the 4 bikes in the test?
So in my test, I had the Specialized Stump Jumper,
Mm-hmm.
the Rocky Mountain Pipeline, the Intense ACV,
Mm-hmm.
and the Scott Genius.
Okay, so there's some fancy bikes there. I mean, that was the most expensive category, wasn't it? So your bikes, I think we had the target price point at 4K.
Yep, 4K. And they ended up being from 3.5 to 4.3. Special was the cheapest at 3.5,
Mm-hmm.
and the Intense was the most expensive at 4,300. But that was £1,000 cheaper than it was when it came out.
Because they've gone to the direct sales
Exactly.
model. Yeah, I mean that's a big improvement for
Yeah.
Intense. Like makes the bikes way more competitive than before. Am I right in thinking this is just the bike that won last year? Because it looks really similar.
It looks very similar, and that would have made the test a lot easier if it was just the bike that we had last year.
For sure.
But actually, it's different. The paint job's pretty much the same, but it's a completely different chassis.
So the bike we had last year was Spark, and this is a Genius?
This is a Genius.
Okay.
So it's got an extra 30 millimetres of travel.
So from 120 to 150,
150, matched front and rear, both 150. Probably one of the biggest aspects is that it's got a horse link at the back instead of having a flex stay arrangement like on the Spark.
So the Spark's got like a one-piece chainstay seat stay assembly, and then the stays flex to account for the pivot. And this bike, because it's got more travel, they probably couldn't use that system.
Just too much flex in the back end for the material to be able to cope with. So the other things are that it's the Spark actually comes in just a confusing multitude of different frames.
Yeah, what do we work? There's over like 100 permutations.
An insane amount of frames.
It's really confusing.
Yeah, the difference with this bike is it's just one frame, and that one frame takes either 27.5 inch wheels with plus tires or 29 inch wheels.
Okay, well, I mean, you and I both know that like a 2.8 27.5 tire is a little bit like smaller than even like a 29er with a 2.3, 2.4 tire. So how do they accommodate the difference in wheel sizes with one frame?
So the tires are slightly different in terms of width. So the Plus bike comes with 2.8s and the 29er comes with 2.6s.
Okay.
And then to allow for that sort of extra difference, they've got a little flip chip, geometry chip in the rocker link there. So you can raise and lower the BB by around about 10 mil.
Okay, so that accounts for the difference in the sort of radius of the wheels.
Exactly, and you know, you can fit sort of more regular diameter tires. I mean, it's such a minefield out there, sort of tire widths and you know, claimed widths and actual widths and what's plus and what's not plus. And in the end, Scott have actually just abandoned calling it a plus bike. They actually they don't even reference
it. 27.5. 29, and you choose whichever one you want. Okay.
And they just come with big volume tires, and they think that's the way forward.
That's pretty interesting, because they were one of the first brands to really like go deep on plus. I mean, I remember going to the launch of the Genius when it had plus tires. They had a whole range of bikes with plus, so it's pretty good that they made such a shift. That flip chip isn't just about the wheel size. I mean, there's nothing to stop you running the bike in the low slack setting with the plus tires, or even running it in the high setting with maybe like some 2.3 inch mud tires or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's actually how I've got it set up now. I've got it in the low setting with the plus tires, and it's interesting because when Scott delivered the bike to me, they said, whatever you do, don't put it in the low setting.
That's what you're going to do. That's the first thing you're going to do, isn't it?
Exactly. And you know, in a way, they're right to be a little bit concerned because the BB is super low in that position. I think it's,
what are you, 320 or something? Is it down
322 in that position?
Okay, so yeah, real low.
And the fact they fitted 175mm cranks means that you do get some pedal strikes everywhere, especially if you live in kind of quite lumpy terrain.
That's got to feel pretty good on the descents, doesn't it?
But exactly, if you're running smoother stuff and you want a bike that's really stable and focused on the descents, then it feels amazing in that setting. So. And the great thing is you can play with it to your heart's content, and as long as you've got a T30 Torx key with you. So
Scott love a remote, don't they? They love a remote.
This is true. This is true.
And this bike's got a lot of cables on it. Can you talk me through what actually their Twinloc system does on this bike?
Yeah, Twinloc system connects this twin lever remote on the bars to the shock and the fork, and you've got 3 different settings. You've got it completely open. You've got a short travel setting, which reduces
from 150 to
100 mil.
Okay.
And that firms up the compression damping on the fork. And then the final setting firms up the compression damping to the max. And it's really useful actually, because when you combine it with, we were talking about the low BB, you can put it in that short travel setting, and then it will give you more ground clearance.
It'll give you a higher ride height.
Exactly, at the push of a button. So if you're pedaling that lumpy terrain, or pedaling up a climb and there's ruts and stuff, and you don't want to get those pedal strikes, you can just
elevate the BB.
Just the dynamic ride height just comes up. So it's a really useful device on this bike, and I really like that aspect of the reduced travel. But I don't want to lock out. I don't want it connected to the fork.
Yeah, me neither.
So there are lots of benefits to it, but I think it still needs refinement for me, because it takes priority over the dropper post remote. So it's harder to actuate the dropper post, which I would rather.
You're going to use that more often on a ride than the
way
lockout,
more useful,
for sure.
Yeah. And I don't think you need the fork connection, and I don't think you need the lockout.
I just know that when I'm climbing, much as I want the rear not locked out, but I want the rear propped up, I definitely don't want the fork sitting high at the same time.
No, exactly.
And I just think that's kind of it's kind of like a little bit of like a flawed idea, even though the execution's actually really good.
Yeah.
And
I think Scott's kind of wedded to that design, and as I say, there are a lot of benefits to it, but I think it could be simplified and refined just to really make it useful, as useful as it could be. So that was one of the things that kind of was a little bit of a
niggle,
flaw
really, isn't
with
it?
this bike. Yeah, to be fair, there weren't many. The cranks were another thing, like I mentioned. It could do with some shorter cranks, and the bar's a little bit narrow.
What we got on there? 760
bar.
I mean, there's quite a few bikes in this category with 760 bar. That seems to be the minimum on the trail bike. And then there was a couple. There was like 4 or 5 with across the whole test with 780s. And then I think Paul's Vitus was the only bike with like an 800 mil bar.
That's right. And I mean, hey, we're being picky here. And for a lot of people, 760 is perfectly adequate. But this bike is so capable that extra width will just give you that extra control, because you're going to be going faster on it. You're going to be hitting rougher trails. It's basically an enduro bike. It's long, it's low, and it's slack. And as much as that is a cliche,
for sure,
it really is genuinely true with this bike. We've got a 470 mil reach on there. We've got 1230 mil wheelbase, and we've got as I say, 64.6 head angle in the slack, and 65.4 or something in
the steep.
Exactly.
It's not that steep, is it, for a trail bike?
No, totally. So it's a progressive bike, and one of the reasons for that is the Scott engineers are they're tall guys, and they've also had some influence from some very progressive bikes. I know that they've
Tyler
been
Brown's bikes for sure.
And obviously Scott can't push the boat out that far, because it's a mainstream band. It's got to sell across the world and to a wide range of riders, but they've definitely taken influence from that, and it's really obvious when you sling a leg over this bike, really kind of fly on the descents effectively. It's
light too, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, all 4 of my bikes were pretty close on weight, but it rides much lighter than the 30 pounds suggest. And because you've got the traction mode, it's really efficient as well as being super capable on the descent. So you've got a really supple suspension, good support and good progression, but then you can firm it up. And if you want to get out of the saddle on a fairly smooth climb, then you're not going to lose all your power in bobbing. So it was the second most efficient bike here, I'd say, in pedaling. The Intense was the most efficient, but that doesn't have a freer setting effectively. So
the other thing with this bike is you got Fox suspension front and rear, and in my category I noticed that the Fox kind of shock and fork had like a more usable range of adjustment. And I mean, I'm 83 kilos. What do you set?
Just under 70.
Under 70. I mean, for a light guy, that's the option, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
no, for sure. I was fully open on damping on all the RockShox forks I had.
On the forks as well?
On the forks as well.
Okay.
And I had to remove the volume spacers from the RockShox forks. Okay. And on the Fox stuff, basically just set it up, the fork to the recommended pressures was spot on. About 2/3 of the way out on damping, on rebound damping for kind of fork and shock. So still plenty of room.
So for someone that's lighter than you, they could go with like a lower spring rate and less damping,
exactly. So and I found that they just worked better as well. They were just gave more grip. They were more supple.
Okay.
And it just I mean, maybe a heavier rider will be absolutely fine on the RockShox stuff, but for me, these were just set and forget, and they performed really, really well.
When I put the test together, the hardest category for me to get 4 bikes for was the plus category. Do you think brands are behind it, or do you think they're nervous about it? I mean, Scott is for sure. I mean, and it shows. It's the winning bike. Yeah. But I mean, I struggled to find 4,000-pound plus bikes.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the ranges of the models that were in the test, every brand pretty much has fewer plus bikes than they do the 29ers, even though they probably share the same frames.
Same platforms, yeah.
So they're obviously thinking, well, we're not going to sell as many of these bikes. The market's not as big for them. But what we're also seeing is we're seeing the standard bikes, in inverted commas, the upsizing their tyres. So
I mean, I had 2 bikes in the 27.5 category, the 2.6 tyres, and I put my 2.6 Mini in next to your Recon, and I mean, they're the same size.
Yeah. Yeah,
you know what I mean? Once you put the knob height on it, it's the same.
And I measured these versus the 2.6 Butchers on the Specialized I've got, and they're within 4 millimeters of each other in terms of overall width. Yeah. So you really are splitting hairs. And I think what you're going to see is the kind of tire sizes converging.
Yeah, I think so
around
too.
that 2.6 area.
I think so too. I mean, could you get rid of those cables yourself on the fork?
If it was my bike, I'd be tempted to try and make something work with an old grip shift or something, just to work the traction mode at the back.
Jerome
don't know whether that'd be possible, but I'd definitely give it a try.
Yeah, for sure.
And then because the other thing with this is that you can't actually tighten or loosen the grip. Because
this is a big problem Rue had with his long-termer, isn't it?
So this little noodle here where the cable comes out blocks the hex key. So your grip comes loose, you've got like a 2-hour strip down
to pain, isn't it?
Yeah,
grip. Totally.
So there's some flaws there.
Why did Scott run the shock upside down? I mean, obviously it has no effect on the performance of the shock because it's a sealed unit, but like why have the trunnion mount at the bottom?
And they can run the traction mode system straight into the top of the shock. So that's the main reason, but also you've got quite a nice wide stable mounting for the trunnion mount in there. So they've done a really good job with the aesthetics, the engineering and the packaging of this bike. Really strong
job. And component wise, we got the 150mm transfer dropper, drivetrain.
So we got the GX Eagle on this one as well.
So you got a 50-tooth cog for
52.
grinding up everything.
You've got a really neat little synchronous sort of chain device, upper chain device there. And then it's actually got Shimano brakes on this, so it's got SLX brakes. They're a pretty good solid performer. I had a little bit of an issue with bike point changing on the rear, but not so bad that I had to bleed it. I kind of just put up with it. That was a little bit of an issue, but the brakes when they're there are super powerful, and I really like the little 1-finger levers. So
they're neat, aren't they?
And the GX Eagle drivetrain's great. I mean, the shifts under load are frankly amazing. And little things as well, like they put 35mm rims on there rather than going to 40, which is a bit excessive, I think, for 2.8 tyres. So you're not kind of carrying around these big burden.
Gives you more flexibility too if you want to go down in tyre size.
And one of the things with plus bikes now is you can actually get decent tyres for them. Like the Rocky Mountain came with Minion DHF, DHR, and they are big meaty tyres.
Yeah, it's chunky in it. Yeah.
And they really grip fantastically, even though they weren't in the 3C compound. But what this bike, even though this didn't have the outright kind of meaty kind of knob section that the Minions had, because of the geometry, you could ride it so much harder. And then when the tyres did give up, because I rode it in some really, really wet conditions at Bike Park Wales and stuff, it was so natural to correct it, and that meant you could just go the fastest on that bike. And yet it was also the most agile bike there. It was pinpoint accurate. And some people might look at the numbers and think, well, God, I can't ride a bike that big. It's crazy.
Just don't look at the numbers.
Don't look at the numbers.
That's the solution, isn't
and
it?
as soon as you get on it, you never get tangled up on that bike.
So it had the best sizing.
Yeah, best sizing.
Best geometry.
Yeah.
Best suspension.
I'd say the best suspension, yeah.
And with maybe if they just had a single lock, rather than a twin lock remote, and a proper underbar lever for the seat post. I mean, you wouldn't change anything else, would you?
You're looking at a 10 out of 10, aren't you, really?
Yeah.
It's just so far ahead of the others, really, I think, and that comes from the geometry and the suspension.
The old Genius didn't have very good suspension.
No.
So, I mean, that was its weakness. I mean, it had quite good sizing for its time, quite good geometry for its time. It also had like the twin lock remote, but the suspension was a letdown thing on that bike.
And it's really, it's come on in leaps and bounds from that older model. It's kind of, at the moment, for a mainstream brand, Scott is way ahead, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, they're doing some great stuff. So.
Yeah. This is true. This is true.
And this bike's got a lot of cables on it.
It's a bit of a snake orgy up front there, isn't it? And so the Twinloc system...
Can we say snake orgy?
We'll let the internet decide whether we can say that or not.